wildlife biologist Eric Orff with my New Hampshire YouTube channel. Today I have the great fortune to be interviewing Andy Timmins, the current New Hampshire black bear biologist. It's the day before the 2020 New Hampshire bear hunting season, so I was able to grab him on the go here at Twin Mountain Hatchery up in Twin Mountain or Carroll, New Hampshire. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of black bear management in New Hampshire and what he perceives as the upcoming season, what's going to happen. And so Andy's been at it a while, but Andy, tell us how you got into fishing game and how you ended up being the bear. So some history, then we'll talk some black bear history too.
Sure. So well, I went to school for wildlife management at UNH, and back then I was grabbing any opportunity to work seasonal jobs of fishing game, try to get my name out there. Shortly after finishing my undergrad in 1994, these biotech positions became available, and those weren't a position that had been around a long time, and three became available, one in Keene, one in Lancaster, and the other in Durham, and quite a few of us applied, and I remember Julie Robinson got the one in Durham. I got the position in Keene, which was split between fisheries and wildlife, and a fellow named John Frank from Wisconsin got the position up in Lancaster, which was also a wildlife fisheries split. I worked in that job in Keene for a couple of years and then got the opportunity to move north to work as a full-time wildlife technician for Will Stats. So I hopped at that opportunity, and then shortly after there I had the option to go back to grad school. It was looking like it was going to be necessary in order to advance, so I took advantage of that, and about the time I was finishing up grad school...
They used to hire dummies like me at Fishing Game with just an undergraduate degree back when you could.
There's a lot of smart dummies out there. Then the bear job came open, and honestly, initially, I didn't really plan on putting in for it because, growing up in New Hampshire in the late 70s through the 80s, particularly down in the outside of Concord where I grew up, you didn't see bears.
There were none, no.
And so of all the species that I had any experience with, bears was probably at the bottom of the list. But the more I got thinking about it, when you're trying to get a job with Fish and Game or as a biologist, you don't pass up opportunities. So I ended up being successful in getting that job, and it's been very rewarding ever since. Bears are a great species to work with, as you know, and they come with their challenges, but they're a pretty neat animal, and they're worth investing the time in. But it's neat to be here with you today because I still have file folders full of data you collected and PR reports that you wrote, and the difference between your tenure when you were trying to recover a bear population and grow a bear population to my career, where we've gone from having, continuing to grow bears to the point where now we've got a lot of bears and we now need to start reducing populations based on...
What's the current estimate?
Current estimate's about 6,000, and that fluctuates anywhere from 5,800 to 6,100 bears a year. We've been growing about 2 to 3% over the long haul. But for the first time in history, about 5 years ago, when we were doing our most recent big game management plan, for the first time the public has said that they wanted to start seeing some reductions. So as our population grew, now we have a management plan calling for some reduction. So right now we've got to reduce our statewide population by about 21%.
Really?
To get to goal.
But
we have 5 more years to do that.
All right.
It doesn't have to happen in a single year.
Maybe I'll throw in some historical perspectives here. Actually, Henry Laramie hired me as the first black bear biologist in October of '78. In fact, day 2 on the job, we went up to Plymouth State College and took a bear out of a tree in the middle of campus with 200 people around. So I actually did a YouTube video about that. But by '85, I'm 78, I began collecting bear teeth for aging. By around '84, '85, we, based on the age that we had at the time, we figured it was maybe 1,000 bears or 1,200 at the time, and we finally convinced the legislators in 1985 to turn over the management of bear to the Fish and Game Department. And that's when we began to really seriously grow the population. We shut down the 7 southern counties, so only the northern 3 counties were only open for a month. So before that, of course, you could kill bears. They were bounty till '56, and I can't believe I didn't ask Henry. I bet it was Henry that got that bounty removed. Dimes to dollars. You could kill them year-round till the mid-'60s, kill as many as you wanted till 1970. So bears were kind of persona non grata for a long time, and so in '85 we kind of, turned what we thought was the declining population. In fact, in '84, '85, there are no female bears older than age 5 in the kill, 4 or 5. Very, very, disturbing that there were no older females producing, 3 cubs. So that's when we really shut the season down and began to grow the population in '85. So from 1,000 to 6,000 bears over the last 30, 40 years, I guess now.
Right.
So they have come a long ways. And, Henry actually began tagging bears in the '60s. See, when I first got the job, he handed me these 3x5 cards that he had been collecting on bears that he tagged and began tranquilizing in the late '60s. In fact, he and Doc Payne, Jim Payne, the vet in Concord, come up with a tranquilizer that worked on bears after several years of effort. And he told Maine about it, so they started using it. Roy Hughey wrote it up in the journal and probably got credit for it, but it was Henry Laramie that actually, after several years, discovered the tranquilizer that would work in the right dosages. So it began right here in New Hampshire, and of course that drug was used around the world after that. So it started with Henry Laramie right here in New Hampshire. All right.
Neat.
History.
Yeah.
That will go away if we don't say it.
Right. No, you're right. You're right. I can remember looking. I can remember looking at I know in the *90s our bear population was around 3,500, and that was about 10 years into the
Right.
after those heavy restrictions that were put on harvest, and from that time on, the population has really grown.
Yeah, there were none in,
steadily.
Cheshire, Sullivan, or very few,
Right.
Rockingham, Hillsborough. There were no bears there. When I grew up in Londonderry, there were no bears, ever.
Right. So, I think we've learned that bears are a lot more adaptable than we ever thought.
Absolutely.
The literature always told you that bears needed huge tracts, unfragmented land to survive, and we know that's not the case. Of course, having bears in a fragmented landscape, bears can do very fine, but there are also consequences, and that comes in the form of conflicts, due largely also to the number of people we have. But yeah, bears have taught us a lot. They're pretty resilient, and their habitat. Their habitat needs are not nearly as specific as we once thought. And, from a reproductive standpoint, their reproductive rates appear to be a little higher than what we originally thought. And, we have bears breeding at a younger age, we have bear cub survival increasing, we have litter sizes increase, so bears have really responded to the habitat.
Great. So, looking at 6,000 bears now and the season opening tomorrow, what do you think is going to happen this season? And the bear kill, when I started working with bears, an annual kill was around 200 bears.
Right.
And it's grown to, you've had a kill of over 1,000 3-4 years ago, and so some record numbers here.
You're right, and I remember 2 years into me becoming the bear project leader. So I became the project leader in 2002, I believe. So around 2003 or 4, we killed over 800, and we were pretty worried about that.
Yeah.
We shut the season down up north early because we were really concerned about overharvesting females, and over time. We've learned that, again, due to our resilient population and the resiliency of bears, is, we can have these high harvests, but as long as they're offset by years of lower harvest, that population has still been able to grow. But yeah, we took over 1,000 bears 2 years ago. Even a low harvest year now is 700 to 800 bears.
Yeah, wow.
This year I think it's going to be a high harvest. I think there's a chance we could take over 1,000 bears again. For a few reasons. There is some food out there, but it's not as widespread as we typically see during a more average year.
All right.
The amount of corn damage that's been going on since August is pretty eye-opening this year. So, a lot of bears in corn means a lot of bears are vulnerable to harvest. Also, with the whole COVID pandemic, people are spending more time outside. We
Unbelievable.
saw a
Unbelievable.
real spike in the turkey harvest this year, and a spike in participation. And I think we could see some of that in
Okay.
the bear hunt.
How many bear hunters do we have?
So we have around.
It was like 1990, the law passed instituting a bear hunting license. It was $2, but it was actually put in there by the New Hampshire Bear Hunters Association. It was the bear hunters themselves that said, we want a bear license to get an idea how many bears there are and to use the money to manage bears.
Yep.
One funny part of the bill was they put a tag on the bill, something about changing the size of lobsters. When we asked the legislator, well, why'd you put that lobster bill on the bear bill? He says, they both got claws. So the bear license bill passed with a lobster amendment.
So that bill in 1990 was extremely important because in the absence of that, I wouldn't be able to answer your question. We wouldn't know how many bear hunters we have, and a lot of states still face that issue. There's a lot of states where a bear tag comes as part of your general hunting license, and when you have that type of situation, you don't know how many bear hunters you have. We have around 10,700 bear hunters.
Okay.
And that, that's been very stable with a slightly increasing. We reached a high of 17,000 bear hunters back when the license, so after the 90s, not soon after, it went to $5.
Okay.
Stayed at $5 for a long time, and then, I forget the year, but at least 10 plus years ago, we went to $16
Okay.
and $48 for non-residents. When we increased to that price, we went from about 16 to 17,000 people bought the tag down to around 10. And because of that, a lot of people were buying that tag because of the low price, and those were really opportunistic bear hunters.
Right.
They tended not to contribute a lot to the harvest.